Hello and welcome to The Writer's Mindset with me, Kristina Adams.
And me, Ellie Betts.
We're here to create a community of authors who persevere, are their most productive selves, and publish at a speed they're comfortable with.
And this week, we're talking to Sacha Black about writing Superbad villains. Sacha Black is a best-selling and competition-winning author, rebel podcaster, speaker, and casual rule breaker. She writes about people with magical powers, sapphic fiction for teens, and other books about the art of writing.
Back in January, I read her book, 13 Steps to Evil, How to Craft Superbad Villains, and it gave me the most amazing idea for The Witch's Sacrifice.
It was so beautifully evil. I loved every second of it.
Thank you. So naturally, based on that, I just had to speak to Sacha about her thoughts on writing the most evil villains. A big thank you to our patrons for all your support. We couldn't do this without you.
As a patron, you get early access to episodes, bonus content, and our undying gratitude for supporting all the work that goes into these episodes to inspire and motivate you. And Kristina has a sneaky surprise for you.
That's right. I've just released the first couple of episodes of our new bonus series, Healthy Habits. This exclusive bonus series is full of the techniques I use to manage my chronic health issues, and now I want to share them with you. Regardless of what speed you write and publish at, there are techniques on things that can really impact our ability to write that we don't talk about. Stuff like nutrition, stuff like whether or not you're moving and getting out of your chair enough and getting that blood really pumping. Stuff like how your brain actually works so that you can get it to work for you.
That sounds incredible. Where can our writers go to listen in?
To find out more, visit patreon.com/writersmindset. With me today is the rebel author, Sacha Black. Welcome back to The Writer's Mindset.
Thank you for having me.
So today we are talking about one of our favorite topics, which is writing evil characters. Before we get cracking though, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about you?
Yeah, so I am Sacha Black. I am the host of the Rebel Author podcast. I also co-host with Daniel Wilcox, the Next Level Authors podcast. I am an author of nonfiction, writing craft books for authors who want to improve their craft, their prose, their stories. I've also just finished a young adult fantasy series, and now I am moving into the realms of sapphic fiction for teens.
Ooh, very nice. So one of your nonfiction books is all about writing evil and the very best villains that we can.
Mm-hmm.
But why do you think so many of us love a good villain? Sometimes even more than the hero.
Yeah, I mean, I personally prefer villains more than the heroes, but my answer to that has changed over the years. Of late, I am obsessed with Clifton Strengths. I don't know if you know what Clifton Strengths are yet.
Can you just explain it for our listeners who haven't heard of it before, please?
Okay, so Clifton Strengths is essentially a personality test that gives you a list of your top strengths. And essentially, the purpose of it is once you know what your strengths are, you can work on improving those strengths and ignore your weaknesses, because strengths are a pathway to success. So rather than getting small gains by trying to improve your weaknesses, if you just focus on improving your strengths, you will get the 10x effect essentially. And any strength can lead you to any success that you want. They don't, box you in to say, oh, if you only have this strength then you can do this or whatever. It's not like that. You just have to find processes that work best for you. And what I have learned recently is that villains are often what's called yellow dominant. So they have a certain set of strengths of which I share those strengths. So I think one of the reasons that I personally like villains is because I see myself reflected in them. Not that I'm a villainous bitch, but, oh God, can I swear? Am I allowed to swear?
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Okay, cool. And then I think the other reason, okay, so like if I take this as a more broad, why do I think people like villains? I think it's because villains question the truth, right? a lot of us get stuck in like stigmas or what society say we should, you know, expectations, societal expectations. But villains are these empowered creatures who follow their hopes and dreams no matter what. And they are relentless in their pursuit of those dreams. And like, yes, I know those dreams might not be good dreams, but that's not really the point. It's the fact that they are relentlessly pursuing what they like, their big goals and their big dreams. And ultimately, isn't that what we all really wish we could do? So
definitely.
And so I think there is a little piece of us that wish that we were as bold and brave as villains, albeit probably for a more positive outcome. So I think that's probably why.
Out of curiosity, who are your favorite villains, either from like books or film or TV?
Right at this very moment, I can't pick one villain that is forever because, you know, new things come out and then you fall in love with new ones or whatever. Right at this moment, I love Villanelle from Killing Eve. She is, I don't know if it's the character or if it's the actress's kind of portrayal of the character, but oh my God, she is just exceptional. So I love her. And then, you know, some more classic ones. I really loved Agent Smith in The Matrix. His kind of ethos and like a manifesto made me stop and go, whoa, wait, what? And like for 1 second, I completely agreed with everything that he was saying. Who else do I love? I love more anti-hero types like Beetlejuice. Who else do I love? I can't think. There's a couple anyway.
We talk about the Marvel villains a lot in this house because my boyfriend also seems to like the villains more. So he's a big fan of Darth Maul. He loves Thanos. His display picture on Disney Plus is Thanos.
Yeah.
And also, is it Killmonger in Black Panther?
Yeah.
Yeah, because like they feel like they're doing the right thing and you can almost understand their logic, but they're going about it in a way that's hurtful rather than trying to make entirely positive change. They're going about it by punishing some people who don't necessarily deserve it, or they're just doing it in a bit of an aggressive kind of way rather than trying to do it in a more diplomatic way, I guess, which is seen as the good way of doing things.
Yeah, so my dad told me this story the other day about this person in a country. So this is a true, I'm not going to mention the countries because I don't want to upset or offend anybody. But basically this person in power had a problem because a disease basically was ripping through the city and thousands of people were dying. And so this person promised like people who were on the streets and the homeless people basically safety on an island. They were going to ship everybody, you know, people who are very like into drugs and things, you know, people causing problems essentially. This person promised them safety on this island. So shipped them all off in this boat and then sunk the boat. Within a week, the disease and the illness was eradicated.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Now, who's the real villain? Because what this person did is fucking awful, but also he saved tens of thousands of people's lives.
Yeah.
So I don't like, when my dad told me this story, I was like, how do I respond to that?
Like me just then.
Yeah, pretty much, exactly. You know, because that's like, who does that? Who does that? You don't do that. But also saved millions of lives. So, you know, was that a villainous decision? I don't know. Like, it's that age-old question of, do you sacrifice one for the sake of many? You know, but who has the right to make that decision? I don't know. You know, and it's taking that right and that godlike right and making that decision with lives that creates that people perceive as villainous. So yeah, like I love that moral debate, like between what is good and what is evil and where those lines are, you know, and that person who was in power felt like they were doing the right thing. So,
but like morally, you're deeply conflicted at the same time.
Yeah. So when my dad told me that, I was like, oh my God, I need to go and like research like what happened.
Yeah, that's how I was spending my afternoon after this.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit more detail like after, but yeah, I was like, oh, MG.
All right, before we go off on a tangent about all the history of this and a moral debate, although that would be very fun, what are some common mistakes you see in fictional villains?
So I think the two most common mistakes are not having a solid motive for the villain. I think that, even some villains who are like really famous, they don't have that. They just want power, right? And without a justifiable reason. Now, there are rule breakers and examples that break rules all the time and they're still successful. Like, for example, and I disagree strongly with the author's personal views and opinions, so that author will remain nameless, but Lord Voldemort is a classic example of a villain who really doesn't have a very justified motive, in my humble opinion. And yet, the books are wildly successful. So there are rule breakers out there and examples of rule breakers, but I genuinely think that when you have a villain who has a more solid motive, like take Agent Smith, for example, you bring a depth and a richness to the characters that make your readers buy into those villains in a way that you just don't get with other stories. So that's probably the first one. And then the second one is not matching the villain and the hero closely enough together. Wait, what are words? You know what I mean? So basically, like the hero and the villain should be aligned, and we might talk about this a little bit more in terms of like thematically they should be aligned, like motivations, goals. They need to be connected so that whoever wins, the win impacts the loser. And because that then you get a more holistic story and a more like fully like it's closed off and satisfying to the reader when you do that. So yeah,
I agree. Although I do find some people are like, oh, this character is just a psychopath, oh, they're just a narcissist, and that's their justification for the character being the way they are. And it's still kind of a surface level justification, right?
It is, yeah. So there's a whole chapter in my book about mental health, because generally speaking, people with mental health disorders are stigmatized quite a lot in fiction, and never more so than with villains. Like, people like, oh, this character's schizophrenic, therefore they're doing bad things. But like, that's complete bullshit. People with schizophrenic are not outwardly aggressive. Yes, okay, of course, there's going to be the 0.1% of people who have just like happen to have schizophrenia, but who do something bad. But then there's more people out in the world who don't have schizophrenia, who do bad things every single day. And the problem is that people use the disorder as the cause for the actions, whereas that's not the case at all. You can have depression and be an asshole, like, just because you have depression doesn't mean you're gonna be a bad person, right? And so I think that's the problem in those circumstances, using the mental health disorder as the justification for bad behavior is essentially stereotyping and stigmatizing a section of society.
It is, and it's really not fair. And I actually realized my protagonists have more mental health issues than my villains a lot of the time.
No, but that's great, right? Because that's, all about representation, and, what you're doing is allowing people who do have mental health disorders to feel represented and to feel seen in fiction. And like, when you asked me the last question, that is where this conversation is going to go, but I'll save that for later.
Yeah, I think that I think that representation is just really important. And also, I'll be honest, I don't know how to write my characters any other way. I find it really hard to be like, how do I write someone who doesn't have anxiety? What does that look like? Like, I live with someone who doesn't have anxiety, been in a relationship with him for 12 years, still can't visualize it.
Yeah.
Because I'm just so in my own head going through different types of anxiety all the time. That's just the way my brain works. And I've recently started down the path of being diagnosed with ADHD, and retrospectively looking at my characters, I've realized I've given them some ADHD traits without realizing. Not that they're like completely ADHD or anything, but they have the traits there, and I didn't realize.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's fantastic, and more authors should do it. So
I agree. It is hard though. So before we go off talking about representation, diversity, you have a really great episode on diversity that I was listening to earlier, if you want to give it a quick plug.
So Mazey Eddings came on. She wrote a book called A Brush with Love, which is about a dentist. It's a romantic comedy, and the protagonist is neurodiverse and suffers with anxiety and a few other things. And yeah, we have a fantastic discussion about, you know, how to write characters who are neurodiverse with authenticity and with respect, whilst also being realistic. And yeah, it was really interesting talking to her. So
yeah, it's a good discussion, and it's one of those things that is hard to balance. And I think the more research you do, the more balanced what you write will become.
Absolutely.
Going back to our villains then, you briefly touched on it already about how your villain should represent the book's antitheme. So can you explain what that is and why a villain needs to represent it?
Yeah, so like, you know, everybody should know what their book's theme is. It is the message, the underlying kind of thread that runs through your story. So like a good example is The Hunger Games, where, I mean, to distill it very simply into one word, the book is about sacrifice. Obviously, it's more complex than that. But essentially, your hero, so in this instance, Katniss, represents self-sacrifice. She makes multiple self-sacrifices in order to help save, look after those loved ones that she loves. But the villain, President, now I always get his surname wrong, Coriolanus, however you say it.
Something like that, yeah.
President Snow, anyway. He represents the opposite, so the anti-theme. He represents the flip side. Now, your hero and villain should always be like two sides of the same coin. They have to have this deeply connected connection, for a better word. And so he represents like sacrifice of others. So for example, she basically in the first chapter, she sacrifices herself and volunteers as a tribute, so to save her sister. And so she's sacrificing herself in order to protect. Whereas President Snow like sacrifices others. He is literally sacrificing teen kids. He brings them back to life and makes them wolves or whatever it is that he does, and sacrifices people over and again, and forces people to work in and live in horrible conditions in order to better himself, essentially. And so when you have like a hero and villain, they should be in conversation with each other. Like, I don't mean that literally, but like metaphorically, it is a debate of the thematic question. And the only way to do that is to have one person on one side of that and then one person on the other side of that. And I think when you don't have that, the books feel like something is missing. They feel like unsatisfying, I think. So yes, hopefully that's explained it.
Yeah, I agree. That was something I really juggled with when I started writing fantasy, was like, what do I want my theme to be? What do I want them to represent? And I realized that my theme is more of a question, and it's about whether or not we have the right to play God and control other people's lives, because it's a series about necromancy. So it's about, do they have the right to bring people back? Should they use their powers to heal themselves or heal other people? What are the kind of moral implications of that? And there are some people who do it for personal gain. There are some people who do it for selfless reasons. So there's kind of lots of different aspects that I'm really enjoying exploring there.
Yeah, and exactly, it goes back to that example earlier on. Was that person in power? That person in power technically did a good thing because he saved loads of lives, but in reality that meant sacrificing a load of lives. And so that's the interesting thing about villainy, because obviously everybody knows that a villain thinks that they are the hero of their own story, right? And I just find that so fascinating, that like ability that we have to explore those moral lines, and the ability to make a reader stop and go, oh, and question what they think as well. And the only way you can do that is by having like those two characters directly oppose each other. Or this is what I also find interesting, when they're both actually going for the same goal, but they have either different reasons why or different methodologies for going for the goal, and one methodology hurts more people and one methodology helps people. That sometimes is just as interesting, like an interplay, as having them completely opposite.
Yeah, I agree. One of the books that always stuck with me because of its moral question was Jodi Picoult's The Storyteller. Cover your ears if you haven't heard and don't want a spoiler, because we're bad for spoilers on this show. But at the very end, the character who did work in a concentration camp but did not physically hurt anyone, shall we say, whereas his brother did, he actually saved someone. He asks someone to kill him after he's told her his life story, and you never find out if she does it or not. It ends at that moment when she says it, and it's bloody brilliant.
Oh my god, that is horrific. She must have pissed her readers off.
She does it a lot, so her readers are kind of used to it now.
Yeah,
because her books are kind of known for raising those moral questions and not answering them, because it's not about inflicting judgment on you or telling you what to believe. It's about raising those debates and really making you think.
Yeah. I read a couple of hers. I can't remember. One was about a young girl and a sister, and someone. The one that you didn't expect to die died.
My Sister's Keeper.
That's it. Yeah.
I haven't read that one, but one of my friends has, and she always rages about the film and how different it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I haven't read it because I don't like sad books.
Yeah, I love a sad book. Like, I love like having my heart ripped out. But I like bittersweet, right? So like even though there's a sad ending, like there's also hope, like at the end of the story. So you can rip my heart out as long as you heal it and put a plaster on it at some point.
We talked about motivations a little bit just then. So what's the difference between a goal and a motivation, and why are they both important?
Yeah, so goals are like the tangible outcomes that your villain wants. Like the villain wants to destroy someone's business. The villain wants to bomb a city. The villain wants to build an army. That's a goal. The motivation is the reason why the villain wants it. So like, why do they want to destroy the business? Like, what is the root cause of that? Who upset them? Like, what is the backstory there? And then the same, like, why do they want to blow up the city, or what, all of these things. So that's the core difference. But the thing is that your villain actually needs both of these, because a villain without a goal, so without the specific outcome that they are after, leads to a villain with no depth, right? A villain without a motive leads to a meandering plot. It's not a very tight plot. It's not a tight story. So you need both of those in the villain in order to have a character that can really pull and create that pace, tension, and conflict throughout the story.
How does a soul scar tie into that goal and motivation, and what actually is one?
So a soul scar is essentially another word for a wound. So everybody always gives their hero a wound. That's the thing that creates the flaw. But the problem is, I don't think that wound is a big enough, strong enough word. So I always like to say it's a soul scar, because these wounds, especially for villains, they have to run so deep that they have left this gigantic scar, literally, like on their very being, in order to generate the mindset that enables them to create or do bad actions, essentially. So a soul scar could be, I don't know, like losing a limb or losing a loved one or failing to save a sibling. It could be, sacrificing one to save many, and then the guilt that comes from that. So like a soul scar is something that creates this wound or flaw in the villain. And the reason that you need it is because that is usually one of the things that creates the motivation and the reason why in a villain's character. And also it creates a lot of depth and often really solid backstory. So it's a great one to include.
I really like the term soul scar, because you say wound and it almost implies it's got the possibility to heal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. That's why it's a wound for a hero, right? Because heroes heal, whereas villains, 9 times out of 10, they don't heal. The only time that that's not necessarily the case is when the villain is a protagonist. And I just did a masterclass recently on villain protagonists, and it makes me want to write a second edition because I've done so much thinking about this that I've got so much more to say on the topic now. I mean, it was like one of the first books I ever published, so it was years ago now. So I suspect a second edition or a second villains book will come out at some point.
Ooh. Have you got any good examples of villain protagonists that you'd recommend people analyze if it's an area they want to explore a bit more?
Yeah, so I'm just going to give films because they're what's on the top of my head. But Cruella, the recent Cruella with Emma Stone, she's a protagonist, and the recent Joker with Joaquin Phoenix. Both of those are villain protagonists. Let me see. I'm trying to think of the Megamind is another one in a kids film. Yeah, I can't do it on the spot. Those are three though.
I think 3 is plenty.
Yeah.
One of the things that really stuck out for me, other than something we'll get to later, was you said that it's important for the villain to have something that they love, whether it's their mum, a pet, a child, something. And it made me laugh because I realized I'd given my villain a dog just because I felt like they needed a dog, but then it actually helped make the villain feel more human and give him more depth because he had that capability of loving something, and the dog was basically him in dog form.
Yeah.
So why is it important for a villain to love something like that?
So this is one of the areas that I've developed my thinking on since I wrote the book. When I first wrote the book, in my mind, it was because we needed to give the villain like one thread of humanity, one piece of them that is good. Because if you don't have, like, nobody is all bad, like it's just unrealistic. And even though, yes, okay, you know, there are horrific people in history who you could say are purely bad, but even those people in history thought that they were doing the right thing, right? So in a weird way, that means that there was a thread of good, you know, whatever. I'm not here to debate what good means. So essentially it was about realism, and that was kind of where I was going with that originally. Roll on 5 years, and for me it's actually about reader connection, right? And so we have this concept called Save the Cat, which Blake Snyder developed, and he's was a screenwriter. And the point of Save the Cat is so when your hero starts the story, they're flawed. But when you have a Save the Cat moment, and quite literally, I mean, like, save a cat, although of course there are many examples where, you know, maybe they help an old lady walk across the road or whatever, you endear the protagonist to the reader. Now, I think that in a good book, you will do the same with a villain, because your reader needs to feel something about the villain. It doesn't matter what they're feeling, but they need to feel something. And if you want your reader to, even for half a second, question whether or not they agree with the villain, the only way to do that is to make them connect with the villain. And so you can do that by either a Save the Cat, like giving them a dog or a pet where they're kind to, or you can do a reverse Save the Cat, which is what I see quite often when you have a villain as a protagonist. And so a reverse Save the Cat is, instead of the character doing something good, something awful happens to the character, and it has the same effect on the reader. So when something awful happens to somebody, we're like, oh no, that poor person. So in the Cruella film, she gets dragged away from her mother, and her mum dies, and she's all alone in London. Now that's awful for a little orphan girl, you know? So automatically we feel sorry for her. We are connected to her. In the Joker film, he gets beaten up by some kids when he's just trying to do his job holding a banner. And that's awful. He didn't deserve it. And so we automatically connect with him, despite the fact that they are both unlikable characters, technically. So yeah, like, for me, it's about connection with the reader.
And that connection, like, the importance of it can't really be overstated, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Another thing you mentioned it's important for a villain to have is integrity. So why does that matter?
So integrity is essentially when, like, you have a set of values or ethics that you hold really dear to yourself. It's like a moral honesty. Now, weirdly, like inner enemies to lovers, one of the foundations of that is this raw, honest truth. And there is something that makes a character, I'm trying to think of a word that isn't integrity, but like makes a character feel genuine when they have integrity and they stick to their moral values. Now, a hero does this because we want to see them as like knights in shining armor. They have these values. They couldn't possibly break their values, except when they do, because they have to save the loved one, you know, and yet we see that as a good thing. With villains, it creates a kind of ferocious, terrifying villainy. When a villain says they will kill your mother if you don't do X, Y, Z, and then you don't do X, Y, Z, and then they kill your mother, that is terrifying because they follow through. And yet we accept that as a reader because they told the truth the whole time. They told the truth the whole way through. Like, one of the examples that I love about this is President Snow in the Hunger Games. He always says, I only ever kill for a reason, and I will never lie to you. And it's true. He sticks to those the whole way through. And I can't help but kind of love him because he's so honest and truthful, despite the fact it's fucking awful what he's doing. So yeah, I think it creates a kind of terrifyingness around a villain when they have integrity, and it creates tension and conflict because the reader will innately know that if a villain says they're going to do X, Y, and Z, then you know that they're going to do that, and that brings up the tension for the reader as well.
I've been rewatching Rosalian Isles recently, and Isles' birth father, because she was adopted, he is a serial killer. He's part of the mob, but he actually says to her when someone is making it look like there's been murders going on, that's his MO. He says, you know, I don't kill women, I don't kill children, I only kill people who deserve it. Yeah. And there are certain people that it looks like it is him doing it because it's the same MO and stuff, but he's like, it really, really wasn't me. And it turned out it wasn't him because he does actually have integrity. But at the same time, he's still quite terrifying because he's still a serial killer.
Exactly. Well, that's like Dexter as well, right? Like Dexter has a moral code that he sticks to religiously. So, you know, he's only going to kill people if the police force weren't able to prosecute. And in a weird way, as a viewer, that makes what he's doing and his actions more acceptable. So like integrity is one of these tools that you can use to really make the reader feel uncomfortable.
Exactly. Let's move on and talk about endings then, because we talked about how we both like bittersweet endings, and obviously happily ever after generally is more of a romance thing, but you do find it in other genres. But why is it not credible if the villain loses everything and then the villain gets everything?
I think realism, you know, in the real, I know there's a difference between fiction and reality, but it's very unusual. Like all war, everybody loses, right? Everyone loses with war. It doesn't matter if you're on the winning side of a war, you still will lose thousands of people, thousands of your citizens. And I think that ultimately every book has some kind of battle or war or sacrifice that has to get made. And so ultimately, I think it brings a sense of realism and sacrifice, like the hero sacrificing and the villain making the hero sacrifice helps to complete that change arc. So it creates a more emotionally gratifying ending that the hero wasn't handed the prize, so to speak, on a play. They had to fight for that win. They have to do something, change something. And that is really what the reader is there for. They're there for that change, to see how on earth the hero is going to get around this seemingly unbeatable villain. And the harder it is, the more satisfying that ending is. The bigger the sacrifice, the greater the payoff, I think, for the reader.
So how far do you think writers should push their main character then in that climax? Like, should it make them uncomfortable to push them that hard?
I think so, because otherwise what are you doing? Like, I really this might be just my opinion, because obviously, you take Disney, you're not going to have, you can't traumatize kids, can you? But, I really think that the hero should have to sacrifice something that means an awful lot to them if they want to win, because otherwise, have they really changed, right? They should have to let go of a piece of themselves, or they should have to let go of something that means a lot to them. There's one exception to that, because we have like the hero's journey, and then we've also got the heroine's journey, and Gail Carriger's written a great book about this. And I think you can push too far if you have promised the reader something. So, for example, the Divergent series, sorry, spoilers, but the Divergent series is a really good example of an author who made an unwritten promise. So the Divergent series follows Tris Prior, but she is a heroine. She is not a hero. And so in heroine stories, it's all about bringing people together and the team winning, right? But at the end of, what was it called? Allegiant? Can't remember. Anyway, at the end of the last book, she dies. So she dies a hero's death in a heroine's story. And like, I personally felt so betrayed. And I think loads of readers felt very betrayed. And it's because she had given this unwritten promise that it would be a happy ever after. And I think that is the occasion, because, you can kill off a hero. You absolutely can make them make the ultimate sacrifice, but only if you've set it up that way. And so, yeah, that would be my caveat. Like, just be careful if you make sure you're like foreshadowing that these things are going to happen, is what I would say.
Yeah, this is why I've become a big fan of doing an outline with my books. I didn't do it for like the first 16 books or something, but now, because of how intertwined some of my plots are, I've started doing it so that I don't shoot myself in the foot, because working on Hollywood Heartbreak, which overlapped with the first couple of what happened in books, and also juggling all of the really complicated themes in that, it was a mindfuck. And if I had plotted my first couple of books in more detail, I wouldn't have had to go back and reread stuff, because I would have just had notes to refer back to. And so now I've been doing that with the Afterlife Calls series. And it was reading that chapter in your book about climaxes that made me go, oh my God, I haven't pushed my characters hard enough. I can do way more. So I was flitting between like reading a page and then writing notes of what I could do next. And then like I was editing it and reading it to send to my beta readers, and it was the first time I read one of my books and go, yeah, that's it. Like I almost gave myself a book hangover, which sounds really big-headed. No. But I'm generally quite harsh on myself, right? And I just thought, no, you know what, this is the perfect way to wrap up this kind of 4-book arc and lead into the next one for these characters, because I hadn't realized it, but I've been foreshadowing some of these events anyway.
Yeah, love it.
Does it always have to be the hero that takes down the villain, though? Could it be like a side character, a mentor, the bestie?
This is a really hard question, but I to give you a black and white answer, yeah, it does have to be the hero. In a heroine's journey, when you have like the ragtag crew of friends, you can absolutely have all of those friends in the climax, right? There are different kinds of stories. There are stories where the hero goes off on his own to save the day. And then there are heroine stories where it's about the group and about the collective. Now, that said, the crew of friends or the found family, whoever it is, can all be there helping to set up the heroine to make that final blow, whatever that looks like. But it has to be the heroine to make the final blow, because ultimately that final blow is the conclusion to the heroine's character arc. And if they are not making the final blow and ending the villain or defeating the inner conflict, whatever it is, then they're not really completing their character arc. And if they don't complete their character arc, your readers aren't going to be as satisfied. Like, I think you really cheat yourself out of that, what's the word? Like that satisfying book hangover sigh that a reader will get when finally the hero took down the villain. And also the other reason you need the hero to do it is because ultimately they are the ones driving the book. They are the ones, or they should be the ones driving the story. And therefore, if they've driven the story all the way to the finale, why would you let anybody else make that final blow? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that was something I always knew who was going to take down the villain because of the fact she's been emotionally manipulated by him the whole time. And all of the other characters are present, but they're doing different things. Like, I can't say anything in case there are any listeners and they're already going to tell me off for spoilers because this book isn't even out yet. But it was really important to me that they were all there and that they all kind of lifted her up in some way. But she had to be the one to take that final blow and then decide if she was gonna actually kill this person or just make them suffer in a kind of Princess Bride type of way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and of course, they don't have to kill off the villain because sometimes that's a choice they don't, a hero isn't going to make. But also sometimes vengeance is bliss.
Yeah, exactly. You've already mentioned one of the books you chose last time we spoke to you, which was the Divergent series.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But have you got any more books that have changed your life that you would like to share with people?
So I'm going to cheat a little bit and say it's a genre that's changed my life. So around July last year, I picked up the first queer novel that I've ever read. Now, as a queer woman, that's probably a bit weird, but every time I would go into Waterstones or wherever, I'd be faced with a slew of straight young adult books. So that's what I read. And I didn't think anything of it. So that's also what I wrote. And it just so happened that I picked up a queer fake dating book. And this was Hanny and Issue's Guide to Fake Dating. And it was the first time I had ever read about two queer women. And it was like, oh my God, they need to get together. And I felt all the things and I felt so much emotion. And I was like, whoa, I really enjoyed that. And it's a good book, but it's not the best book in the world. It was a solid story and I enjoyed reading it, but I enjoyed reading it way more than I should have enjoyed reading it for sort of kind of the standard of the book. And I was like, what is that? So I picked up another queer book. And I can't remember what that one was. I think it was by Tess Sharp, The Girls I've Been. And then I picked up another book. And then I read Some Girls Do by Jennifer Duggan. And it was after reading that one that I was like, oh, I see now. The connection is the fact that all these characters and all these protagonists are gay. And I was like, oh. And so now I have been consuming queer fiction. And it was a real come to Jesus moment where I was like, oh my God. And now I can't unknow it, right? I can't unknow the fact that there are queer books out there and that I like reading them more than I like reading straight books. And so, now for me, that has changed everything. So I spent the last 6-7 months finishing off the series, which is kind of behind me. And now I'm moving into writing sapphic fiction for teens. And that has literally changed the course of my career because I can't knowingly write straight books anymore, at least not for a while anyway. Maybe I'll go back to it, but. That's
so cool. I love that you that it's just sparked a complete change in direction by discovering these books.
Yeah, literally. I was like, this must be what everyone feels when they read about relationships in books. And I love romance. So and I would ship the characters still, in a straight romance. It's not, but it's a totally different feeling when you see your love in a book. It has literally changed my life. I feel so much stronger about fiction now than I have done in ages. And it's almost like I've fallen in love with reading again.
That's cool.
Yeah. So
didn't you mention in the episode we talked about earlier about you looked into how many queer YA books there were or something, and there really wasn't very many?
Yeah. So queer young adult books, when I did my research about 6 to 8 weeks ago, there were about 760, I think it was, books in queer young adult. And of those, at the time, it was about 150 that were sapphic. Now I think it's over 200 because there's a lot of books coming out now all the time. Even still, like 150, 160 out of 760, it shows you like how tiny this market is. So yeah, like it's a very, very small market, and I think it's going to be a really hard sell. But I don't care.
I think there is demand for it, because I've spoken to a lot of people who've been like, I don't connect to straight romance in the same way that I do queer romance. Where's the queer romance at? You know, and they just don't even know how to find it.
Yeah. So my plan is to basically clear my decks of work and then write hard and fast for the rest of this year.
Very nice.
Yeah.
You've been recommending some queer fiction on your Instagram as well, haven't you?
Yeah. So I missed last week because it was my birthday, and my wife randomly flew my dad over from the Netherlands as a big surprise. So yeah, I lost all of Friday, but that's fine. So yeah, every Friday I will release like a little slideshow of like, I don't know what I've done, like maybe I can't actually remember what I've done, but I'll do it like by trope, or I'll do, fantasy books I want to read, and they're all queer and they're all sapphic. And the other thing that I've done is I've actually collated the list of 150 books, although I've just found another list. So I've also brought a load more books, so I need to compile it again. And I think next month, maybe, what is it? We're in March, April or May, I'm going to start releasing it as a reader magnet. So if people are looking for recommendations, like follow me on Instagram, and then in a month or so's time, I will announce that I'm like, I'm going to share this leaflet basically. So yeah, I basically want to have the biggest list of queer books for teens, or like mostly sapphic books, I would say. I haven't really got like gay or trans books on them. A couple of trans books are on there, but yeah, because it's so hard, it was so bloody hard to find these books. So I'm like, well, I'll share that, and I will, but you got to sign up to my mailing list. Yeah.
Where can our listeners go if they want to check you out on Instagram or anywhere else?
Okay, so you can follow my podcast just using any podcatcher, and it's the Rebel Author Podcast. I am most active on Instagram, which is at Sacha Black Author, and it's Sacha with a C, so SACHA, or my website, sachablack.co.uk.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been really fun.
Oh, thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed The Writer's Mindset, we'd be really grateful if you could leave us a rating or review on the podcast platform of your choice, or a thumbs up on YouTube.
It really helps other writers to find us so that we can help them to achieve their wildest writing dreams too.
And don't forget, if you'd like early access to episodes, a chance to submit questions for our guests, and listen to our new bonus series that Kristina mentioned earlier, come and join us over at Patreon at patreon.com/Writer's Mindset.
Every little bit helps us to help you more, whether it's a rating, a review, or becoming a patron.
I'll see you next time.
Keep writing.